So this guy basically steals millions of dollars from Netflix. Now the guy's name is Carl, and Carl's around 35 when this story starts, and he's living in Los Angeles, and Carl works in entertainment, mostly directing commercials for big brands like Mercedes and Heineken and stuff like that, which is great for him, but here's the thing. What he really wants is to direct big budget TV shows and movies. And one day, he gets the chance to do just that. Because Universal Studios hires him to direct an action movie called 47 Ronin. And 47 Ronin isn't some small indie film. This is gonna have a budget of over $170 million. And it's gonna star Keanu Reeves. And for Carl, this is everything. It's his first real chance at Hollywood. I mean, he can't mess this up. And so he gets to work and production begins. But almost immediately, things start to fall apart. Partly because Carl insists that each scene of the movie should be shot twice. Once in English and the other in Japanese, because most of the actors in the movie are Japanese natives. The problem with this is that this screws up the production. The movie now costs twice as much to shoot. It also complicates the whole movie editing process. And so of course, the producers and financiers of the movie are not happy about this. And so Carl is eventually removed from the editing process altogether. And if things couldn't get worse for him, once 47 Ronin finally comes out, it is a disaster. Not only does the movie bomb, but it gets destroyed by critics, earning a whopping 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. So his big movie flops. And just like that, Carl's dream of being a big Hollywood director collapses. So, what does he do? Well, he goes back to directing commercials and, making money that way. But he isn't about to give up on Hollywood just yet. He's convinced that all he needs is one more shot. So pretty quickly, he starts working on a new project with this woman, Gabriella. Gabriella is actually Carl's wife. So they start working on a sci-fi series called White Horse, and it's got humanoids and robots in it and stuff like that, so it sounds pretty cool. And Carl actually finances it himself, and eventually they start shooting it. And so this ends up being a great little passion project for him. Like, it's fun and it keeps him busy, but after a while, he's able to make 6 short episodes, each around 4 to 10 minutes long. Here's actually a still frame of one of them, so you can see that it's like a sci-fi thing. But then, over time, Carl decides that White Horse isn't just gonna be a passion project, it's going to be his big comeback. So he takes those short episodes and he uses them to pitch the show to every major streaming platform that he can think of. He apparently wants one of these places to finance it so that he can make it into a full-length, long-form series. And one of the places he pitches the show is Netflix. Now, I don't know what the executives at Netflix actually look like, but I assume they look like this. So the Netflix execs, they hear this pitch and they actually like it. And they agree to fund White Horse. And they send over some initial funding of millions of dollars, and in 2018, Carl and his team, they begin shooting in Brazil and Uruguay and Hungary and some other places. But now here's where it all starts to fall apart. Because, as it turns out, being a creator, director, and producer of a big budget TV series is actually a really stressful job. And over time, this stress really gets to Carl. And he starts abusing his ADHD medication, which can apparently cause mania. And soon enough, people on set start noticing changes in his behavior. Like he's constantly shouting and cursing at people and lashing out at all the crew members. And over time, he becomes completely erratic. Like he even starts accusing Gabriella, his own wife, of plotting to have him assassinated. In fact, he gets so crazy that eventually Gabriella, some of Carl's family members, and other crew members all get together and they stage an intervention, which apparently ends up not working at all. So anyway, more time passes, and it's now 2020. And by this point, Netflix has already put in $44.3 million into Carl's project. But despite that, somehow, Carl's production is out of money. I'm guessing they spent it all on production costs and stuff. So he has to go back to the Netflix execs and ask for more. And they initially say no, but Carl tells them that if they don't give him more, that he can't finish the project at all. So Netflix kind of has no choice. They don't want their investment to go to waste, so they wire him $11 million more. Now, at this point, Carl could try and finish up his production and maybe make Netflix a cool sci-fi show, and maybe he'll become the successful Hollywood director that he's always wanted to be. But that's not what Carl does. Instead, he takes that $11 million Netflix sent him, and he transfers it to his personal stock trading account, and he starts trading options and going all in, making extremely risky trades. And within just a couple of weeks, of that $11 million Netflix gave him, he loses $5.9 million of it. Oh no, but he's not done yet. Then he moves the remaining money into a cryptocurrency trading account, and he buys millions of dollars worth of a meme coin that you've probably heard of called Dogecoin. Here's the crazy thing though. This gamble actually pays off. Dogecoin spikes, and the $4 million that he put in shoots up to $27 million. Crazy lucky bastard over here. So now he's got some options. He could put this money into his production or even pay Netflix back the $11 million that they just gave him. But of course, that's not what he does. Instead, he goes on a spending spree. He buys 5 Rolls Royces, a Ferrari. He spends over $650,000 on watches and clothes. He buys 2 mattresses, that cost $638,000. What? Then he spends an extra $295,000 on luxury bedding and linens. Then he spends about $400,000 on luxury hotels and rental properties. He also pays off about $1.8 million in personal credit card debt. Meanwhile, while he's doing all this crazy spending, he keeps assuring the Netflix execs that production of the series is progressing and that everything is going fine. But of course, it is not going fine. Because apparently at this point, shooting has completely stopped. And around this time, Carl's behavior spirals even further out of control. He starts leaning into crazy conspiracy theories. He claims that he has the ability to predict lightning strikes and volcanic eruptions. One time he tells his wife, Gabriella, that airplanes are organic, intelligent beings sent to greet him. And all of this is happening during COVID. So he also starts claiming that he found a way to map the coronavirus signals coming from within the Earth. Like, what? And at some point during all this, Gabriella just gets fed up with all of Carl's crazy bullshit, and she's like, screw it, I'm not gonna deal with this anymore. And she goes to Netflix and she tells them all about what's been going on with him, and she also files for divorce. So the Netflix execs, they take all this information in, and they realize that Carl either isn't going to be able to finish the project or has no intention of finishing the project. Either way, in 2021, they inform him that they will no longer be funding his project. However, but that he is free to take the project to another streaming platform and sell it as long as the new owner reimburses Netflix for the money that they've spent. And again, Carl could reimburse them with the millions of dollars in Dogecoin money that he now has, but for whatever reason, he doesn't. Instead, he just gets super pissed off and he goes and he hires a lawyer and he files a lawsuit against Netflix for breaching their contract. But unfortunately for him, they go to arbitration and Carl actually loses. And in fact, the arbiter rules that he actually owes Netflix $11.8 million. Not only that, but federal prosecutors get involved, and they end up charging Carl with wire fraud and money laundering for taking millions of dollars of Netflix's money and not spending it on the production. And so, bam, he gets arrested. And I don't have a mugshot, but here is a picture of him in real life. And so ultimately, Carl goes to trial and he's found guilty, and he actually hasn't been sentenced yet. His sentence isn't until next year. So this reality TV show star thinks he has superpowers, and this causes him to do some really terrible things to people. Now the guy's name is Chad, and Chad is 40 years old when this story starts, and Bro, like I said, he's somewhat of a reality TV star. He stars in this show on Discovery Channel called Mystery at Blind Frog Ranch, where he and his dad live on a big ranch in Utah, and there they hunt for lost treasure like gold and ancient Aztec artifacts that they believe are hidden there. They also investigate potential paranormal activity on the ranch, but, of course, they never really find anything. Regardless, Chad, he's kind of a thrill seeker, and he's definitely got some mental health issues. So one night in 2024, those mental health issues start to become very apparent because he is out in Amarillo, Texas, riding his Harley Davidson, and the dude blows right through a red light, and a cop in an unmarked police car just happens to see him. So the cop pulls out, and he follows Chad, and he tries to pull him over. And Chad, he's already got an outstanding warrant for a previous past offense, so he decides, fuck the police, and he doesn't stop. And this quickly turns into a high-speed police chase. So he's cruising along for a while, and after he feels like he's lost them, he pulls over in an alley, and he ditches his Harley, and he runs away on foot. But he doesn't get too far before police finally catch him, and bam, they arrest him. Here's his mugshot. Now, Chad, he isn't in jail too long before he gets bailed out. And a few months pass, and it's now 2025. And Chad, he's out driving, and he happens to be speeding. And again, police pull him over, and this time they find that he's driving with an invalid license. And so, bam, police arrest him again. Here's his mugshot again. And he's not locked up very long before he gets out on bail again. Now, during this time, traffic violations aren't the only problems he's having. By now, you know he's a pretty eccentric guy. I mean, on the TV show he's on, he always claims that his family's home is cursed and it contains buried treasure and maybe also UFOs and ghosts and skinwalkers and just all types of supernatural stuff. So at some point, Chad starts believing that he himself has supernatural powers. He believes that he has the ability to see inside a person and see if they are an evil spirit. And he refers to them as predators. So around this time, Chad starts seeing his ex-wife as a predator, and he gets angry at her and he accuses her of being that. Not only that, he accuses his kids of being the same thing. And then he starts threatening to murder them. So his ex-wife rightfully goes and she gets a protective order against him, and he officially gets barred from contacting any of them. A few months after that, randomly, Chad just disappears. His friends and family don't know where he is. And his family knows that his mental health is getting worse, and so they get worried about him. So they go to the police and they report him missing. And eventually, luckily, he is found safe in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But at this point, it's clear that it's only a matter of time before he snaps. A few months after he's found in Albuquerque, he goes to Las Vegas for some reason. And there, he's staying at the Encore Hotel. Well, at some point during this trip, his credit card gets declined, and he isn't able to pay for his room. So he gets all angry and belligerent about this, and he goes and he locks himself in the room, and he won't let anyone in, and he refuses to leave the hotel. So the hotel staff calls the police, and police show up, and bam, they arrest him yet again. Here's his mugshot again. Now, because he was arrested those times before in Texas, Chad has an active warrant out for him for contempt of court. I assume he just didn't show up to his prior court hearings in Texas, so they put a warrant out for him. Regardless, he's technically considered a fugitive in another state. So in Vegas, he has to stay in jail for a while. Now here, in jail, is where things get really crazy for him. As I've said before, Chad believes he has supernatural powers. He believes he has the ability to see spirits inside people, which allow him to know if they are bad people. He calls these bad people predators. Now, during this time, he's in jail, locked up with some people who have probably done some really bad things. So you can imagine his so-called super ability is going off like crazy. But, for some reason, Chad really zeroes in on this guy. His name's Christopher. And Christopher, he's in here serving a 6-month sentence for violating probation on a theft case. He also has a history of property-related offenses. So it seems like the guy's got some issues, but he doesn't appear to be a violent offender. Regardless, that's not what Chad is seeing. Chad definitely sees evil spirits in Christopher. He thinks he's a predator, and he becomes convinced that Christopher is the kind of person who is guilty of being inappropriate with kids, if you know what I mean. Even though Christopher has no history of having any child-related offenses whatsoever. And what's weird is that these guys have gotten along so far. Like, they've never had any issues. They've never gotten into any fights with one another or anything like that. But it doesn't matter to Chad. He's convinced that this guy is a predator. And when he gets these kind of bad vibes about someone, he believes that it is his personal responsibility to act on his supernatural power and take care of the problem. So he feels like he needs to do something about Christopher. And so, as the weeks pass in there, this feeling in him gets stronger and stronger. And he has nothing but free time to think about all this stuff and to think about how he's going to take out his cellmate. Then, Chad realizes that he's scheduled to be released from jail soon. So if he wants to take his cellmate out, he needs to do it within the next couple of weeks, or he's going to lose the opportunity. So one day, Chad and Christopher, they're in their cell, and they get into some kind of argument over something, who knows what, and this argument gets pretty heated. And after, Christopher lays down in his top bunk facing the wall with his back to Chad. And Chad, he sees this as his opportunity. And suddenly, boom, Chad grabs him from behind and he puts him in a chokehold. And Christopher, he fights and he tries to scream for help, but Chad won't let him go. And other inmates around, they can hear the struggle, but they're all locked up in their cells, so they can't really do anything. And so Chad holds Christopher there until he stops breathing, and he's no longer alive. Then he places him on the bottom bunk and he covers him with a blanket, like he's asleep. Now, this particular detention center is already overcrowded and apparently understaffed. So the guards there, they're not really able to pay close attention to everything that's going on. And so 8 hours go by, and none of the staff notices Christopher's body. But then, some of the guards are doing a routine check, and they finally find him there on the bunk. And so police come in and they investigate and they interview Chad, and he confesses to everything. He says he killed Christopher because he saw evil spirits in him and he felt that he was a predator, and he says that he doesn't care if he spends the rest of his life in prison because of it. And so, bam, they arrest Chad. Well, I guess they don't actually arrest him because he's already in jail, so I guess they just leave him locked up. But he has since been declared legally incompetent to stand trial, so his trial over this hasn't actually happened yet, but he will very likely spend the rest of his life in prison. So this TikTok couple is in big trouble. So the guy in this couple, his name's Chris. And Chris, he's about 30 when this story starts, and he's living in Texas. Now, Chris really wants to be a home improvement influencer with his wife, this woman, Raquel. And so they want to be home improvement influencers, which basically means that they're trying to be TikTokers who focus on home renovations and interior design, stuff like that. So one day in 2020, Chris and Raquel decide to start their own home renovation and construction company. They're basically gonna remodel people's homes for them. And in order to market their new company, they start putting themselves on social media.
Hey guys, I'm Chris.
And I'm Raquel. We're with the Judge DFW Real Estate Group.
Now during this time, Chris, he's working as a real estate agent. Plus, he knows a bit about construction. But that's not exactly what he tells people. He actually lies to people and tells them that he's a licensed architect. In fact, he alludes to it right in his social media bio. Now, eventually, people start to reach out, I assume because they're seeing their videos and advertisements online. And these people, they're wanting things like new kitchen floors for their house or whatever. Once a potential customer shows interest, Chris and Raquel will offer them a low bid compared to their competitors. And Chris will promise to complete all the work in 4 to 6 months.
And you get to move in knowing that you don't have to make any repairs.
And people hear this deal and they're like, sounds good. Once they get into the contract and paperwork of it all, Raquel will let them know that they need a $10,000 deposit to get everything started. Then, of course, the client pays the money and boom, the work officially starts. Now, so far, everything is going well, and Chris and Raquel start attracting more and more clients. But then, they start running into some problems. The main issue is that Chris, he really doesn't seem to have a good idea of what he's doing. After a homeowner hires his company to do a job, he'll then turn around and hire cheap subcontractors to actually do the work. And a lot of times, those subcontractors will do a terrible job. And on top of that, sometimes Chris just won't even pay the subcontractors. And because the subcontractors aren't getting paid, they'll just stop showing up. So homeowners will be paying all this money for things like new windows or new doors or whatever, and those new windows or doors will just never get installed because the workers never showed up. And of course, at some point, the clients start to realize, hey, all this stuff I'm paying for, it isn't getting done. What's the deal? And Chris and Raquel will then come up with excuses like that this is a totally normal delay in construction and this happens all the time with home remodeling. And the homeowners don't want the work to completely stop, so they'll continue making the payments. And of course, these payments are going right into Chris and Raquel's pocket. Now, at some point, some of these homeowners will get mad, inevitably. Once this happens, once a client starts getting frustrated, they try to hit up Chris and complain, and Chris, he'll just, ghost them. He just won't pick up their calls. So now, a lot of these poor homeowners are stuck with a half-finished house and a contractor who's no longer answering his phone. What a nightmare. And if you think it can't get worse than that, it actually does. So the homeowners remodeling projects that were abandoned by Chris and Raquel, these people are now having to pay new contractors to come in and fix the mess. And these aren't small projects either. Some homeowners paid Chris and Raquel hundreds of thousands of dollars to get work done. In fact, one homeowner gets screwed over by this so bad, this guy has to file for bankruptcy. Not only that, but a lot of these people move out of their house completely while the work is being done, and Chris flakes out and he stops showing up or whatever, and so now these people are without a place to live. So anyway, Chris and Raquel, they keep this scheme going. They're out there abandoning project after project after project while still keeping these people's money. And they don't do this just like one or two times. They scam over 40 different people out of, are you ready for this? $5 million total. And of course, inevitably, like every scammer we talk about, Chris and Raquel, they're taking all this money they got and they are spending it on themselves. They spend $82,000 buying shit on Amazon. They spend $27,000 of it on their own mortgage payments. They spend $10,000 of it on plastic surgery. And all these shenanigans go on for a few years. And the really bad thing is that when homeowners report them to the police are basically like, oh, a contractor didn't show up for work? Sounds like a civil matter. Because, contractors are notorious for not showing up. Plus, police just don't yet realize the severity of this fraud, because they don't realize that over 40 families have been scammed. So it looks like nothing is ever going to be done about this, and that Chris and Raquel can just keep taking homeowners' money and abandoning their projects. Until 2022. 2022 is when Chris and Raquel's little scheme finally starts to catch up with them. Because it's around this time that the Texas Board of Architecture discovers that Chris is falsely claiming that he's an architect, including in his social media bio. And so the board issues him a formal warning. Like, bro, you're not a licensed architect, stop telling people you are. Now, you would think that this formal warning would get Chris and Raquel to pump the brakes a little, maybe slow down a bit on this whole scheme. But they don't. They keep taking on new clients and they keep taking their current clients' money while leaving old abandoned projects behind. Now, eventually, someone that they screwed over decides to take action and connect with other people that they screwed over. And this person starts a Facebook group. And quite a few former clients of Chris and Raquel's join this group, and they all start sharing stories. And some of them get so fed up that at some point they decide to file lawsuits against Chris and Raquel. Because a lot of these people lost a lot of money. Not to mention that the work Chris and Raquel oversaw was so cheaply done that a ton of it isn't even up to code. Like, they built a 2-car garage with no rafters. In one house, they put in floors that were uneven. And there are door openings in the same house that were all different sizes. They put in a lot of bad wiring and stuff. In one place, they installed windows that weren't even rectangle. How do you even do that? And so anyway, because a lot of their work isn't up to code, Chris and Raquel's company ends up getting 424 citations for code enforcement violations. 424. Well, so anyway, eventually, so many people have been scammed by them that the local police and the FBI have to get involved. And they all start investigating together, and they see that Chris isn't an architect at all, and then they find all these projects that weren't completed and how they're using the money they were paid for personal things. And so, bam, Chris gets arrested. Also, bam, Raquel gets arrested. And I couldn't find a mugshot, but here's what they look like in real life. And so ultimately, they both take a plea deal, and they actually haven't been sentenced yet, but Raquel is facing up to 5 years in prison, while Chris is facing up to 20 years in prison. So this is probably one of the most evil women I've ever talked about. So the woman's name is Sante, and Sante is 36 when this story starts, and she's living in Las Vegas. And here's the thing about her. She really, really loves living an expensive lifestyle. Like nice cars and big houses and jewelry and all that stuff. And she'd do just about anything to try and get that life. Like at one point, she sets her husband's house on fire multiple times just to claim insurance money. She'll also steal like money and jewelry and dresses and cars and really anything she can get her hands on. Now, eventually, her husband has had enough of her crazy antics and they get a divorce. So now, Sante is single, but she's not gonna stay single for long. She needs a man to fund her lifestyle. So eventually, in 1971, she meets this guy, Ken. And Ken is a successful property developer, and this dude is rich. He's worth about $22 million. So, of course, she's attracted to him, and soon they start dating. And eventually, years pass, and they get married, and they have a kid together. And just like that, Sante finally has access to Ken's money. And therefore, everything she wants. Mansions, cars, and just the lifestyle. But, for whatever reason, this doesn't stop her from being a terrible person. Like, I guess to save money or whatever, instead of hiring a housekeeper, Sante starts smuggling young Mexican women in from Mexico to work as maids. And while they're working for her, she really mistreats these maids. She locks them up, she doesn't pay them. Sometimes she'll even burn them with a hot iron if they piss her off. Like, it is crazy. Now, eventually, one of these maids escapes from her home. And the FBI gets involved, and bam, Sante gets arrested. And she gets convicted of trafficking, and she gets sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, unfortunately, 3 years later, she gets out. So now it's 1989, and Sante decides that she wants to celebrate getting out of prison and travel the world a little. So she pulls her son out of school. Her son is this kid, Junior. And Junior, he's around 14 at this time, and he is the son of Sante and Ken. So Sante pulls him out of school, and together they start traveling across different countries. Mexico and Japan, and across all of Europe. And while they're doing all this traveling, Sante keeps living a pretty shady life, and just like stealing from people, even though she's rich now. And the worst part is that she does all of this right in front of Junior. Almost like she's grooming him to be just like her. And over time, he does end up wanting to be like her. Junior becomes more and more attached to his mom. And eventually, he starts joining in on her crimes and stealing with her. And about 5 years pass, and it's now 1994. And Sante and Junior, they're done traveling now, but it's here that something terrible happens. Sante's husband, Ken, suddenly has an aneurysm, and he dies, unfortunately. Here's the thing about him, though. He actually has 2 other adult children from his first marriage. And of course, since he just died, they should inherit some of his wealth. But Sante isn't about to let that happen. She knows that if Ken's family finds out that he's dead, she and Junior might have to give up his money or his properties. She has no idea exactly what could happen. So she doesn't tell anyone in the family that he died. She keeps that shit a secret. And she quickly has him cremated. And from here, she starts using his credit cards and withdrawing all his money and slowly taking control of his bank accounts. And about 3 months go by, and she finally tells Junior for the first time, like, hey, by the way, your dad died. And she also tells him about her plan to keep pretending that Ken is alive so that she can keep using his money to fund her lifestyle. And surprisingly, Junior is on board. Like, he starts helping her drain his dad's bank accounts and spending all his money. And 2 more years go by, and Sante is still out here spending Ken's money and writing checks in his name and stuff. And that is when this guy notices. His name is Saeed. And Saeed, he's been Ken's personal banker for years. And one day, Saeed notices a lot of strange transfers and spending happening with Ken's account. Dead guys don't usually spend that much money. So he starts looking into it. And pretty quickly, he realizes something shady is going on. And eventually, he figures out that Sante is the one behind it. Now, at the same time, Sante realizes that Saeed knows about her spending Ken's money. And she knows this is really bad for her. And she decides that from here, the only thing she can do is murder him. So in 1996, Sante invites Saeed over to her house for coffee. And she's pretending she just wants to clear some things up. So he comes over, and while he's there, she and Junior roofie him, and while he's passed out, they drown him in the bathtub. Then Junior takes his body and he dumps it in the ocean. And just like that, the problem is solved. Then Sante and Junior move from Las Vegas over to Florida. And there they continue living off Ken's money and stealing from other people as well. And years pass. And eventually these two have successfully spent all of Ken's money. Like, there's nothing left in his bank accounts. All that's left are a few properties that he owned. So they decide to cash in on those too. Now, one of Ken's houses in Vegas is actually under a different guy's name. This guy, David. Ken apparently put it under David's name because I guess he was trying to hide his assets from the IRS or something like that. But anyway, Sante ends up forging David's signature in order to take out a $280,000 mortgage on that house. And this actually works. The loan gets approved and the bank gives her the money. But then her greedy ass goes and sets that house on fire, hoping to collect some insurance money on it. Now, after that, David finds out about the mortgage and the fire, and he immediately knows that Sante's the one behind it. So he goes straight to the bank, and he reports all of this fraud. And the bank ends up halting Sante's insurance payment. So Sante gets super pissed off. And from there, Junior gets a gun, and he goes over to David's house, and blam, he straight up shoots him and kills him. Then he wraps up the body, and he dumps it in a nearby trash bin. Afterwards, he and Sante leave the state, and they flee all the way up to New York City. And there, in New York City, they end up renting a townhouse apartment from an 82-year-old woman. And I guess she lives there too. So I think they're just renting out a room in her townhouse. And while they're living in this woman's place, they start wiretapping her phone to collect personal information from her. And eventually they use that information to get a copy of the deed to her whole townhouse apartment. And Sante forges this woman's signature on a deed transfer, and they transfer ownership of the place to a corporation that Sante set up. Then, one day, out of nowhere, Junior attacks this poor woman with a taser in the townhouse, and then he strangles her to death. And after that, he dumps her body in a trash bin over in New Jersey. Yeah, it's crazy. These guys have gotten away with so much so far, it seems like they're just never gonna get caught. Until a few hours later, people close to the woman notice that she's missing, and that's completely out of character for her. So they contact the police, and police start investigating. And it doesn't take long before they connect everything back to the two people living in her townhouse, Sante and Junior. And eventually they catch up to both of them, and bam, they get arrested. Here's Sante's mugshot. Also, here's Junior's mugshot. And ultimately, Junior takes a plea deal and he gets sentenced to 125 years in prison, while Sante goes to trial, she gets found guilty, and she's sentenced to 120 years in prison. Remember that strange con woman who wanted to avoid getting arrested? So she cast some sort of magic spell using cow tongues in a jar? Now, the woman's name is Dawn, and Dawn is 44 when this story starts, and she's living in Maryland. And Dawn's got a lot going for her. She works at a major investment firm helping clients invest their money, and she gets paid pretty well. But, for whatever reason, Dawn isn't satisfied. She wants to make even more money. So one day in 2006, she takes steps to do that. She quits her job and she starts her own investment company. And immediately, things seem to be going okay. She's actually able to get a few of her clients to move over from her old firm. But it's apparently not enough. Because Dawn doesn't have a ton of clients, so she isn't managing as much money as she used to. And this feels like failure to her. So she decides to do something about it. And she low-key starts inflating her numbers. She tells people that her firm manages about $1 billion in assets and that they rank among the top 1% investment firms in the world, which is all bullshit, but people don't know any better. And this actually works, and she starts pulling in a ton of new clients. Then, in 2009, she submits these made-up numbers to Barron's, a major financial magazine, and they end up featuring her, and she gets ranked 5th on the list of top 100 women financial advisors. And being featured blows Dawn and her company the fuck up. And suddenly her name gets traction in the investment world, and Dawn takes full advantage of this free publicity. She launches her own radio show on AM radio, and there she talks about the massive returns all her clients are supposedly getting and how she's making them all rich. And all of this continues to work because people actually believe her, and her listeners begin investing their money with her. So now Dawn is getting paid left and right, and her firm is managing around $400 million in investments, which is a large and very respectable amount of money to manage. However, it's still not enough for Dawn, because she feels like she has to lie to people now and tell them that her company is now managing about $2 billion in investment assets, so that they think her company's more successful than it actually is. And people fall for it. Many of the people who listen to her radio show are retirees or elderly people, and they don't know any better. They see Dawn as this genius investor who's managing a ton of finances. Now, here's where she runs into a problem. When you lie at this scale, eventually you need results to back up the numbers. And Dawn just doesn't have results like that. So in order to try and get some results, she starts placing her clients' money into some extremely risky trades. Yet she'll tell them that she's investing conservatively and that their investments are safe. And so, as you can imagine, it doesn't take too long before things start to go wrong for her. Soon enough, the trades go bad, and her investors start losing money. Like, a lot of money. One guy invests about $1.1 million with her and her company, and she loses $920,000 of it. Which sucks for that guy, but Dawn doesn't seem to care, because she's about to get into something even bigger. In 2010, she takes some of the money that she's making off these people and she starts her own luxury sportswear website that sells a bunch of extremely expensive sportswear, like $13,000 golf bags, $700 ski hats, stuff like that. But here's the thing. She tells her investors that it's a much bigger website than it really is. And of course, she tells them that it's an opportunity to make some serious money. She shows them fake financial statements claiming that the website is thriving and pulling in millions of dollars, and all they have to do is invest in it and they could all be so rich. And once again, this works. People actually believe her, and they start investing money into her stupid website. Now, in reality, her website is not that big. It's actually losing money, as you can imagine. Ain't no one trying to buy a $700 ski hat. And so this site is somehow losing millions of dollars. But Dawn isn't being honest with her investors, so they're still investing. And then she decides to turn all of this into one big Ponzi scheme, where she'll use new investors' money to pay off old investors. And if that isn't bad enough, she also uses a lot of that investor money to fund her baller-ass lifestyle. She owns 2 penthouses, multiple expensive cars. She owns more than 700 pairs of designer shoes, along with belts and purses to match. She spends more than $100,000 on cosmetic procedures. She also leases a luxury suite at the Dallas Cowboys Stadium for $500,000 a year. Oh, but here's the weirdest one. I guess she's really into astrology, because of course she is. She spends $141,000 on astrological gems, whatever the hell that is. $141,000 on some rocks. And while she's spending all this investor money, her scheme keeps growing and growing. And by this point, Dawn has taken about $20 million total from her investors. But, as it turns out, investors, they don't like losing their money too much. And some of them who had lost money, they get super pissed off. And they decide to go and report Dawn to the FINRA, which is an organization that regulates investment firms. And so soon, the SEC gets involved, the Securities Exchange Commission, and they start investigating Dawn and her firm. And without a doubt, they quickly discover that she has been inflating her assets and lying to her investors. So in 2016, the SEC fines her $650,000 and they ban her from the securities industry. Here's the thing about Dawn, though. She is not one to just give up, and she has no intention of listening to the SEC or anyone else for that matter. So she keeps going. She keeps funneling investment money into her luxury sportswear website because she is determined to stay rich. And honestly, she might actually get away with it. Until the entire scheme begins to fall apart. Because one day, an 80-year-old woman decides that she wants to invest with Dawn. So she goes to her bank to wire $32,000 to Dawn's company. And a bank employee there notices the details of this investment, and they're thinking something feels off about this. I mean, the whole thing feels very shady. So the employee decides to look into Dawn's company, and that is when she discovers that Dawn had previously been charged with fraud by the SEC. So the bank immediately reports all of this to the SEC again. And soon the FBI gets involved, and pretty quickly the feds realize that Dawn had gone right back to doing what she was banned from doing. Meanwhile, Dawn's investors find out that she's under investigation again, and they start calling her and asking for all their money back. The thing is, she doesn't have enough money to pay everyone back, because that's how Ponzi schemes work. That's why they fall apart. And so she starts ghosting everyone and making excuses as to why she's unavailable. But here's the weirdest part. She also turns to spiritual protection to help her get out of trouble. And she spends about $800,000 to get 200 Hindu priests in India to perform some hocus-pocus rituals which are meant to block the SEC investigators from uncovering the truth about her. Not only that, but she also starts practicing hoodoo rituals. And one ritual in particular is called the shut up spell, where she buys cow tongues, slices them open, and stuffs pieces of paper inside, each one with the name of an SEC officer investigating her. Then she casts a spell on them and seals them up in jars. I guess this is supposed to stop them from investigating her. Well, this clearly doesn't work, because once the feds get enough evidence against her, bam, they arrest her. And I can't find her mugshot, but here is what she looks like in real life. And ultimately, Dawn goes to trial, and she's found guilty, and she gets sentenced to 20 years in prison. So this high school student commits murder, and Snapchat gets him caught. Now the kid's name is Chaden, and Chaden is 16, living in Iowa, going to high school like a normal kid his age. And in 2021, Chaden decides something that's ultimately going to change his life forever. He decides that he really wants to go study abroad in Spain. However, he also realizes he's got a big problem. His Spanish teacher. His Spanish teacher is this woman, who we'll just call Spanish teacher. Now, according to the students at the school, Spanish teacher is beloved and very good with her students. But she's also known to be an extremely tough grader. A lot of the kids complain about how hard her class is. So of course, Chaden really struggles in her class. In fact, he's essentially on the verge of flunking it. Now, I'm not sure if he's doing poorly on his assignments and whatnot, and he deserves to be failing the class, or if Spanish teacher really was just that tough. Regardless, Chaden feels like he has put in the work and he doesn't deserve to have a failing grade. And to him, this is crucial that he pass. Otherwise, he won't be accepted into the exchange program and he won't get to go to Spain. So Chaden becomes obsessed with this failing grade. And pretty quickly, his obsession turns to anger. And he starts blaming all of this on Spanish teacher. Like, how dare she fail him after all the work he's put in? And he'll go and vent to his friends about his grade. Sometimes he'll go and talk to her Spanish teacher about it, and he'll argue with her, claiming that he doesn't deserve the grade. And at one point, he even goes to the school with his mom to have her talk to Spanish teacher about the grade. And I'm not sure what is specifically said in this meeting, but Spanish teacher ends up holding firm, and she doesn't change his grade at all. So, over time, he continues to get more and more angry over this, and he starts to believe that she is out to get him, like she's personally trying to ruin his life. And that is when he starts telling his friends that he wants to murder her. One of those friends he talks to is this kid, Jeremy. And Jeremy is also 16, and he goes to school with Chaden, and he's also in Spanish teacher's class. So one day, Chaden tells Jeremy, I really hate this Spanish teacher. Want to help me kill her? And I guess Jeremy's like, all right. So they get to work, trying to figure out how they're going to successfully pull off this murder without getting caught. And they meticulously plan everything out. They start stalking Spanish teacher, trying to figure out where she's going to be and learning her daily routine. They make a list of supplies to get, and they get them. Chaden starts Googling things like, what happens to students' work if the teacher dies in the middle of the term? And do students receive credit for a class if the professor is seriously injured or dies more than halfway through the course? And so 2 weeks go by. And during this time, they learn that every day, Spanish teacher goes for a walk at the local park, where she always follows a trail that passes through an isolated area, meaning when she walks that part of the trail, she'll be alone and vulnerable. So Chaden and Jeremy decide that this is going to be the perfect place to attack her. They'll wait until she's on her walk, and once she gets alone, they'll ambush her with a baseball bat. So one day, I guess Chaden talks to Jeremy, and they decide that today is the perfect day to go through with this. So Chaden and Jeremy, they go to school, and they go to all their classes like it's any other normal day. Then, after school, they head over to the park, and they hide out, and they wait. Sometime later, Spanish teacher shows up, and she's going through her daily walk and whatnot, and at some point, she sees them out there passing by. and she has no reason to be suspicious of them. I mean, it's a public park. So they exchange greetings and they move on. But then Jeremy runs ahead on the trail loop to get in front of her again, while Chaden doubles back so that he's now following behind her. And Spanish teacher doesn't realize anything's wrong, so she keeps walking. So Jeremy puts on a ski mask and he starts walking toward her. And she sees him. And I assume this scares her a little because the only person around is a guy coming toward her wearing a ski mask. But this keeps her distracted and all her attention on him. And this allows Chaden to successfully sneak up behind her with the baseball bat. And suddenly, pow, he hits her in the back of the head. And then pow, he hits her again and again. Then he passes the bat to Jeremy. And Jeremy takes it and pow, he hits her too. And of course, she unfortunately doesn't survive this attack. And then the guys drag her body away from the trail and into a woodsy area of the park, and they leave her there. But not before stealing the money out of her wallet and the keys to her van. Then they take her van and they drive it to the outer edges of town to a rural area, and they ditch it, hoping that no one will find it. Hours later, around midnight, they go back to the crime scene because they want to clean up any evidence that they accidentally left behind, and they want to hide the body a little better. So they clean up the scene, and they move her body even further away from the trail. After that, they both go back to Jeremy's place and they get drunk. The next morning, Spanish teacher's husband comes home. Apparently, he had been out of town for a few days, and he has no idea what happened to her. He just knows that she's not home. And so he gets worried, and he calls the police and he reports her missing. And so police start investigating, and a community-wide search for her begins. That same day, Chaden and Jeremy go to school like normal, except that they're super tired from staying up all night trying to hide a body and hungover from all the drinking they did. But even so, they have no problem talking about what they did with the other students. Like when Spanish teacher doesn't show up for class, all the kids are naturally wondering where the heck she is. While Chaden is all flexing to his friends that he caught a body with a baseball bat. Oh, and Jeremy is much worse. His dumbass has been Snapchatting some of his friends about it. Like during the process of hiding the body, he's been Snapchatting. Here he is with a bottle of bleach saying, "Time to hide a body." Here he is holding the shovel that they used to re-hide the body. Here are some more tools that they used to re-hide the body. And the most disgusting one is the Snapchat he made making a joke about the murder. POV, you're my Spanish teacher, and this is the last thing you see. And so anyway, he sends all these Snapchats to his friends, and some of his friends freak the fuck out, naturally. Like, did they really just kill our teacher? And so they go to police, and they're basically like, my friend has been posting on Snapchat that he killed our teacher. And around the same time, police find Spanish teacher's body in the park. So now they know that she's dead and that someone killed her. Probably the guy confessing to it on Snapchat. And so, bam, they go and they arrest Jeremy. Here's his mugshot. Also, bam, they arrest Chaden too. Here's his mugshot.
Both teenagers charged with killing a Fairfield High School Spanish teacher will be tried as adults.
And so ultimately, Chaden takes a plea deal and he gets sentenced to life in prison, while Jeremy also takes a plea deal and he gets sentenced to life in prison. So this guy wants a nice car collection really bad. He wants one so bad that he's willing to do evil things to get it. Now the guy's name is Joe, and Joe is 29 when all this starts, and he's living in Tennessee. Now, here's the thing about him. Joe loves cars, and he really wants his own car collection. But there's a problem. Joe works as a manager at a local shoe store, which means he doesn't get paid enough to buy himself a whole collection of cars. So one day in the 90s, Joe decides to change careers, and he becomes an insurance agent. Maybe this will be the job that will finally let him make enough money to buy whatever cars he wants. So he starts selling insurance, and he does okay at it, and he learns everything there is to know about the business. And then, around 1997, he opens his own insurance business. Nothing big, just, helping other people set up their life insurance and annuities and stuff like that. Now, it doesn't take too long for Joe to realize that he's still not making enough money from all this to buy the car collection that he really wants. So I guess he decides that the only thing left to do is start scamming people. So when a client comes to him wanting to set up an annuity, he will take their money and instead of sending it to the insurance company like he's supposed to, he sends it straight into his own bank account. And then he'll lie to the client and tell them their whole annuity has been set up. And this works, and it works well. So he keeps doing it with client after client after client, scamming them out of their funds. And over time, all this stolen money he's sending to his own account starts to add up. So he begins spending it on himself. And this dude is living the life. He's going out to expensive dinners, he's hitting up the casinos all the time, he's going on nice cruises, he's buying himself all kinds of expensive antiques. But most importantly, Joe is finally able to buy a bunch of cars and start building the car collection he's always wanted. And pretty quickly, he gets himself 8 cars, including 3 Corvettes and some Hummers and some Porsches. Meanwhile, he continues to scam his clients through his insurance company. At one point, he turns the whole thing into sort of a Ponzi scheme. When his clients ask for their money back, Joe simply pays them using money from other clients. And so he just keeps all this going. And 8 years go by, and it's now around 2008. And by this point, he's stolen around $780,000 from his clients. But it's around this time that things start to get complicated for him. Because Joe actually has a wife. This woman, Tina. And Tina has no idea that Joe's been scamming people all these years. She just thinks his insurance business is doing really well. So it's no surprise when she starts thinking that Joe could maybe use some of this money to buy them a new house. And she's wanted one for a long time. I guess she just doesn't like where they're living. But unfortunately, every time she brings it up to him, he shuts her down immediately. And he's like making up excuses. He's telling her that they can't get a new house. They have other things they need to spend the money on. But the thing is, Joe knows that they could get a new house if they wanted. He doesn't want to get a new house because he doesn't want to apply for a loan. He knows that applying for a loan would mean that they have to allow lenders to dig through their finances, and the second anyone digs through their finances, his entire insurance scheme will get exposed. And he's not about to let that happen. However, Tina doesn't want to give up on this idea. She's determined to get a new house, so she keeps pushing him. And that same year, 2008, she finally decides that she's done waiting. Whether Joe agrees or not, she's gonna get a new house. Somehow. And that is where the story gets dark. See, Joe understands that Tina really wants a new house, and that he can't get one without risking getting caught. And so he starts to panic. I mean, he doesn't want to go to prison. I mean, who would? He then comes up with this insane plan. He decides he's gonna murder his wife Tina. That way, she'll no longer push him into getting a new house, and all his secrets will stay buried. So he gets to work on this plan. He starts pretending that he also wants a new house. He's like, "Sure, honey, let's go get one." And they go house hunting together. And eventually, Tina finds the place that she loves. And Joe tells her that good news, he's already found a buyer for their current house and that he'll handle everything and close the deal himself. And Tina's like, "Great, thanks, dear." But in reality, Joe isn't talking to any other buyers. That's not part of his plan. He's just trying to keep her placated. Then, one day, Tina's at home and she and Joe get into some kind of argument. And this argument gets heated, like really heated. And that is when Tina decides that she's had enough and that she's gonna leave to go cool off and run an errand. So she heads to her truck. And just as she's about to get in, suddenly Joe appears behind her and pow, he places a plastic bag over her head. And she struggles, but using all his strength, he holds her there until he suffocates her and she dies. After that, he wraps her body in a blanket and he places it in the back seat of her truck. Then he drives it to a street that's a few miles away from their house and he parks. Then he immediately goes over to a friend's house to do some work on a car. That way, he has an alibi. Later that night, he goes home and he starts calling several of Tina's friends and he asks if they've seen her because, she's missing. And he's like pretending to be all worried and stuff. Now, these friends, they've obviously not heard from Tina, and she's not the type to just disappear on everyone. So immediately, they know something's wrong. And so they begin searching for her. And of course, the police are now involved. 2 days later, police find Tina in the backseat of her truck. And she apparently still has all her jewelry on, so police know this wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was a planned murder. Meanwhile, Tina's friends and family start noticing that Joe, he's been acting strange lately. Like, he's not acting like someone who just lost his wife. First, he starts getting rid of all of Tina's belongings, her clothes, her shoes, her Bible. Then, at the funeral, he's just way too happy. Like, he's giving people thumbs up and he's playing inappropriate music, and it seems like he just can't wait for the funeral to be over. Regardless of how guilty he's acting, police don't have any real evidence against him, so they can't arrest him. And it's starting to look like Joe might actually get away with all this. Until this woman steps into the story, Carrie. And Carrie, she's a family friend who once gave Joe $25,000 to put into an annuity for her. And at some point, Carrie decides that she needs to cash in $10,000 from that annuity because she needs to pay off some debt or something. So she hits up Joe, and Joe makes sure that she's paid $10,000. However, Carrie notices the check that she received is not from the insurance company. It's actually from Joe and Tina's personal checking account. And that is when Carrie gets suspicious. And so she contacts the insurance company, and that's when she learns that Joe never actually set up any annuity for her. So she goes straight to the police, and they start investigating Joe and his finances, and soon they discover that he had been defrauding his clients the whole time. And that's when they realize that Joe killed Tina to protect his fraud from getting exposed. And so, bam, they arrest him. Here's his mugshot. And ultimately, Joe goes to trial, and he's found guilty, and he gets sentenced to life in prison. Remember when that My Little Pony fan went insane and he murdered a bunch of people? So the story all starts with this guy, Brandon. And Brandon is 18 when all this begins, living in Indianapolis, and the dude has a problem. Actually, he has a lot of problems. He has some mental health issues. He's dropped out of school, he doesn't have any friends, so he's always isolated. In fact, one of the only things he seems to show interest in is the cartoon show My Little Pony. He loves My Little Pony. He watches all the episodes, his whole bedroom is decorated with My Little Pony stuff. This is an actual picture of his bedroom, and you can see how he's got it all set up. And that's fine and all, people like what they like. But Brandon likes My Little Pony to the point of delusion. Specifically, he appears to be in love with the character Applejack. He feels like he has a deep personal connection with her. He often refers to her as his wife. And if that isn't concerning enough, one day in 2020, Brandon really starts to go off the deep end. Because that is when he goes to a local army surplus store and he buys himself a shotgun. And during this time, he still lives at home with his mom, who we'll just call Mom. And because Brandon lives at home with his mom, she finds out about the shotgun and she freaks the hell out. Mostly because, like I said, he's got a history of mental health issues. Like, he's been arrested before for battery, he used to get suspended from school for fighting. The dude has got some violent tendencies. So of course, she questions his motives for buying the gun. And Brendan straight up tells her that he plans to point it at police so that they shoot back at him and kill him. So he apparently wants to unalive himself via cop. So this, without a doubt, freaks Mom out even more. And then he gets super pissed off and he punches her in the arm hard. So poor Mom has no other choice. She goes to police and she tells them, "My son just bought a shotgun and he's threatening to point it at cops so that they shoot him." And police actually hear her out and they go over to her house where Brandon is to check on him. And when they get there, he immediately starts acting anxious. And the officers ask him where the shotgun is, and he says it's upstairs, but he tells them that if they go up there, they need to turn off his computer so that no one sees what's on it. And I'm sure that makes them very suspicious. So, of course, when one of the officers goes upstairs to retrieve the shotgun, they see what's on Brandon's computer screen. Some neo-Yahtzee propaganda websites. Which is not technically illegal, but it's also not a good look. Then police seize his shotgun, and they detain Brandon and they take him to a local hospital to make him get a psychiatric evaluation. So he gets the evaluation, and somehow Brandon is able to convince the doctors there that there's nothing wrong with him, and that he isn't a danger to himself or others. I guess this works because within 2 hours, they declare, "You're fine," and they let him go. Now, at some point, local police contact the FBI, and they tell them to keep an eye on this kid with mental health issues who just bought a gun, who has a bunch of neo-Yahtzee stuff on his computer. Because, they think he might be radicalized. So the FBI starts investigating Brandon. And about a month later, they come over to his mom's house to question him because they want to see if he's actually a threat. So they're there and they're talking to him, and it's there that Brandon randomly mentions that maybe one day he could join law enforcement. And one of the FBI agents is like, "Let me stop you right there." And the agent lets him know that it's probably not going to be an option for him. Because, the neo-Yahtzee stuff on his computer. And by the time the interview is done, an agent tells Brandon's mom that he shows all the signs of a mass shooter, but that he also hasn't committed any crimes. So they can't just, arrest him for nothing. And on top of that, police, who just seized his shotgun the month before, they're supposed to have what's called a red flag hearing, where they hold a court hearing to formally convince the court to ban him from owning guns in the future. But for whatever reason, they fail to hold that hearing, which means Brandon can now legally go out and buy guns again. So, of course, over the next several months, Brandon goes out and he buys 2 rifles. Now, here's where shit gets real. That same year, he gets a job working for FedEx. And, he's doing fine there, apparently. But a few months go by, and his mental health issues keep getting worse and worse. And slowly but surely, he stops showing up to work. He just abandons the job. So FedEx fires him. Or he quit, depending on how you look at it. And a few more months pass, and it's now 2021. And Brandon continues to disconnect more and more from the real world. All he seems to care about are the characters from My Little Pony. And as he disconnects, he decides that he is going to show everyone else that he is his own man and that he doesn't need anyone else's acceptance. In fact, he plans to walk into his old job at FedEx and murder a bunch of people. So one night in 2021, he decides that, this is the night that he's gonna do it. So he tells his mom that he's going to bed, but he doesn't go to bed. Instead, he packs up those 2 rifles that he bought, and those rifles have My Little Pony stickers on them, by the way. Then he gets on Facebook and he posts one final status, declaring his love for his favorite My Little Pony character. And the post is actually a picture of him holding a gun, and the caption says, "I hope that I can be with Applejack in the afterlife. My life has no other meaning without her. And if there is no afterlife and she isn't real, then my life never mattered anyway." Then he gets into his car, and his car also has My Little Pony stickers on it, and he drives over to the FedEx facility. Once he gets there, he parks, and he gets out, and he sees some FedEx employees in the parking lot, and suddenly, Blam, 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 blam. He starts shooting at them. Anyone he sees, he fires. Blam, blam. And everyone runs away, panicking. Then he heads over to the employee entrance and he enters the building. And there's a bunch of people in the lobby. And blam, 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 blam. He starts shooting at them too. Now, Brandon wants to go further into the building, inside the main warehouse, where there are hundreds of employees working. However, luckily for all of them, he can't get past the security gate. So he has nowhere else to go, and he decides to head back out to the parking lot, and there, blam, 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 he continues to shoot at more people fleeing. And so far, he's killed 8 people, and he's wounded 7 others. And one employee is at his car, and he's able to get a gun from there, because I guess he keeps a gun in his car, and blam, he shoots once at Brandon, but he misses. Then the guy just runs away, because, he ain't trying to get shot. And by now, everyone in the area who has access to a phone is calling the police. So it's only a matter of time before they show up and bust him. And I'm not sure if Brandon realizes this or what, but next he goes back into the FedEx building and into the locker room, and there he takes one of the rifles and he unalives himself. So this doctor is so terrible at his job that he's going to poison other doctors' patients so that he doesn't look so bad. Now, the doctor's name is Ronaldo, and Ronaldo is around 58 when all this starts, and he's living in Texas. Here's the thing about Ronaldo, though. He's actually a really terrible person. Like, at one point, his neighbor, I guess, helped his girlfriend at the time leave him, so in retaliation, Ronaldo shoots at his neighbor's dog with a pellet gun. Now, luckily, the dog is okay. But here's the other thing about Ronaldo. Not only is he a terrible guy, but he's also terrible at his job. He actually works as an anesthesiologist, and one time he's at work and something goes wrong with one of his patients and they need CPR immediately. And Ronaldo just doesn't do it. He's just like, nah, I'm good. He doesn't even put the incident into the patient's medical records. That's how little of a fuck he gives. So yeah, he's awful in a lot of ways. And he has a history of doing all kinds of awful things, and so far, he hasn't really gotten in any trouble for it. But in 2022, all that starts to change. Because one day he's at work during a routine procedure on a patient, and he fails to maintain the patient's airway, which is basically his job being an anesthesiologist. And so the patient stops breathing. And this is a huge screw up on his part. And the surgical center he works for, they can't let this slide. And they launch an investigation into him. And this is really scary for Ronaldo. I mean, he already has a prior disciplinary action on his record, and if they find him at fault for this, he could lose his medical license, which means his entire career would be over, and he ain't about to let that happen. So Ronaldo comes up with an insane plan. He's going to make his coworkers look just as bad as him. I guess the logic is that if other doctors there start making mistakes during their surgeries too, then Ronaldo won't look like the worst doctor there anymore. It's wild. So 2 days after he's told that his bosses at the surgical center are investigating him, he gets to work. So at the surgery center, there is a warming bin in one of the hallways. And there, they keep a bunch of IV bags, heated, in case a patient needs one. Which means that any staff member can grab a bag from there at any time. So when no one is around, Ronaldo goes to the warming bin and he starts taking a few IV bags out at a time. And then he will inject them with a bunch of dangerous drugs, basically poison. Then he'll put the bags back into the warmer for other doctors to unknowingly use. And here he is on security camera, and you can see him opening the warming bin and messing around in there. I'm not sure what he's doing. But here's the thing. This evil plan actually works. And soon enough, a woman comes to the hospital for some kind of routine surgery, and one of the staff, without realizing it, hooks her up to one of the tainted IV bags. The next thing you know, her blood pressure spikes, and she goes into cardiac arrest. Now, luckily, the doctors are able to perform a life-saving procedure, and she survives. Regardless, Ronaldo is happy that his plan was successful. I mean, he got to cause chaos for the other doctors and make them look bad, so he wants to do it again. And so at one point, a different woman comes to the hospital to get a stomach surgery. And sure enough, one of the staff unknowingly hooks her up to one of the tainted IV bags, and pretty quickly, like the woman before her, her blood pressure spikes and she goes into cardiac arrest. And ultimately, the doctors have to send her to the intensive care unit to make sure that, she doesn't die. And so Ronaldo keeps doing this again and again and again. And over the next several months, 4 patients suffer cardiac emergencies, and there are 13 other unexplained emergencies that Ronaldo likely had a part in. And all of this starts to make a lot of the doctors there look really bad. And of course, Ronaldo is super careful to make sure that none of these IV bag issues ever happen during any of his surgeries, only during the other doctor's surgeries. So, he doesn't want to accidentally make himself look bad. Now, here's where the story gets kind of dark. Ronaldo works with a lot of other doctors. One of them is this woman, Dr. Melanie. And one day, Dr. Melanie is at work, and suddenly, she isn't feeling so well. She's all dehydrated. So before she clocks out, she grabs a saline IV bag from the warming bin, and she takes it home with her to treat herself. And this bag happens to be one of Ronaldo's poisoned bags. So she gets home, and her husband helps her set up the bag and hook it up to her and whatnot, and then he leaves. 5 minutes later, boom, Dr. Melanie's blood pressure spikes, and she starts to feel severe pain in her arm and chest. So she immediately calls her husband on the phone to come back to her. By the time he gets there, she's in serious pain, and she's screaming at him to call an ambulance. Then she collapses onto the floor. So husband panics and he starts doing CPR on her. But unfortunately, it's too late. Dr. Melanie dies. Now, her death was pretty sudden and unexpected. So they have an autopsy done on her. And while they're waiting for the results, they just presume that she had a heart attack or something. Well, eventually the results come back, and they show that she died from bupivacaine toxicity. Bupivacaine is a drug used in anesthesia procedures. So police start getting suspicious. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, doctors and staff keep using Ronaldo's contaminated IV bags, so cardiac emergencies continue to happen. At one point, an 18-year-old kid comes into the hospital for nose surgery, and so the doctors put him under and he's getting the surgery. And at some point, they change out his IV bag, and of course, they unknowingly hook him up to one of Ronaldo's IV bags from the warming bin. And this 18-year-old immediately goes into cardiac arrest. And his doctor starts freaking out because this was supposed to be a simple 2-hour surgery, and all of a sudden, this kid is over here fighting for his life. But then, another doctor runs into the operating room. Like, I think there might be a problem with the IV bags, so change his IV bag. And so they do. They switch out the kid's IV bag with a different, non-contaminated one, and then boom, within a minute, the kid stabilizes. Then, one of the doctors examines the IV bags closely, and they see that the one used when the kid was having the cardiac event has a tiny puncture hole in the plastic. And that is when they all realize that someone had been tampering with the bags. And so the surgical center reaches out to the FDA about all these unexplained cardiac emergencies that now they believe are from the tainted IV bags. And they also start reviewing security footage from around the place, and immediately on that footage, they see Ronaldo doing very suspect things in the warming bin. And he's not even supposed to be stocking the IV bags in the warmer. Like other staff takes care of that. So the fact that he's even there is highly unusual. Anyway, of course, then they test the IV bags and they find that they are full of that poison he put in there, which proves that they have in fact been tampered with. And pretty quickly, it's confirmed that Ronaldo is the guy who did it and that his antics led to 11 cardiac emergencies while he was there. And so FDA agents go and they find him and bam, they arrest him. Here's his mugshot. And ultimately, Ronaldo goes to trial and he's found guilty and he gets sentenced to 190 years in prison. So this woman has 5 different husbands, and she kills a bunch of them. Now the woman's name is Betty Lou, and Betty Lou is 15 when all this starts, living in Virginia, and Betty Lou is just a weird person. She apparently likes to get married, but she doesn't seem to like the guys she's marrying. One day in 1952, while she's still in the 9th grade, she gets married for the first time to husband number 1. 16 years later, when she's 31, husband number 1 leaves her for another woman. Then in 1970, she gets married again to another guy, husband number 2. But that same year, she and husband number 2 divorce. However, they continue to see each other. Then, a year later in 1971, they get into a fight and he hits her and he breaks her nose. A year after that, in 1972, they get into another fight and she shoots him a couple of times. He doesn't die though. Then she claims self-defense and he stops cooperating with police, so she doesn't go to prison for this. But they are, in fact, broken up. But then, that same year, 1972, they get back together. But then 1 month later, she and husband number 2 finally get a divorce. Okay, but then a few years go by, and it's now 1978. And Betty Lou meets a new guy, and she marries him. He's husband number 3. So these two end up moving to Texas, and they fight a lot. And at one point, she tries to run him over with her car. So they're only married for about a year before she and husband number 3 also get a divorce. That same year she gets that divorce, 1979, she meets another new guy and she gets married to him. And he'll be husband number 4. And she and husband number 4 also start fighting a lot. So after only being married for a year, in 1980, they get a divorce. But for some reason, they continue to see each other. I guess they like smashing. But then, a year later, in 1981, she decides that she's ultimately tired of his shit and that she's going to straight up murder him. So one night, they're at home and she waits for him to go to sleep. Once he's out, she gets a gun and she sneaks up on him and blam, she shoots him in the head. And she just leaves his body there. The next day, she goes over to her daughter's house, and she confesses to what she did. She's like, I shot husband number 4 last night. And this daughter is from a previous marriage, by the way. And Betty Lou tells her daughter that husband number 4's body is still back at the trailer where she lives, and she asks her if she'll help her get rid of it. And I guess daughter's like, all right. So they both go back to the trailer, and they pick up the guy's body and they drag it over to a hole that had been previously dug for a barbecue pit, and they dump it in there. The next day, Betty Lou gets some cinder blocks and she builds a makeshift patio over the place where they buried the body. So the body is now basically underneath the back porch. And so that's that. Husband number 4 is gone. And no one knows what happened to him. I guess everyone just assumes that he just ran off in the middle of the night or something. And no one suspects that Betty Lou did anything wrong. So she just moves on with her life like nothing happened. And about a year goes by, and it's now 1982. And surprise, surprise, Betty Lou meets a new guy. And they start dating, and pretty quickly, they get married. So he's husband number 5. And husband number 5 moves into her trailer with her, the one with the body buried underneath the back patio. And within a year, by 1983, this marriage starts running into some problems. Now they're fighting all the time and not getting along. And since she already killed her last husband and got away with it, she decides to do the same thing to husband number 5. That way, not only can she be rid of him, but she can collect on his life insurance policy and his pension benefits. So one night, she and husband number 5 are at home, and she gets her gun, and blam, blam, she straight up murders him. Right after that, her son comes over after riding his motorcycle. And he's obviously a son from a different marriage. It's not like she just killed his dad. And I guess Betty's like, I finally did it! I killed husband number 5! And she asks her son to help her bury the body. And the son hears this request, and I guess he's just like, all right. So they both pick up husband number 5 and they drag him out to the front yard and they dump him in a wishing well that's out there. Now, here's the thing about all this though. There is apparently a specific clause in husband number 5's life insurance policy that says that it will pay more in the event that he dies in an accident. So Betty Lou's like, well, I guess I gotta make his death look like an accident. So she and her son get husband number 5's fishing boat and they take it out to the local lake that he's always fishing in. Then they scatter his heart pills all over the boat and they leave his fishing license in it. Then they push it off into the lake because they're trying to make it look like he just went fishing one day and then randomly fell overboard or something. After that, Betty Lou goes back to her trailer and she calls police and she's like, my 5th husband is missing. And so police start investigating. And 3 weeks go by and they've looked everywhere and they still can't find him. But then, around this time, some bystander reports that they found a fishing boat abandoned on the lake. And so police go and they search it and they find husband number 5's fishing license and his heart pills scattered all over the place. And so police start searching the lake for husband number 5's body. And of course, they don't find it because it's buried in Betty Lou's well. Meanwhile, during all this, Betty Lou, she's trying to get paid. She wants to cash in that insurance money. But there's an issue with that. It's a little too early to be collecting life insurance because police are still looking for husband number 5. So technically, he hasn't been declared dead. So instead, she decides to burn down a lake house that he owns so that she can collect insurance money on it. So she goes and she burns down the lake house. Then she tries to collect the insurance money, but for some reason, she's not successful. I guess she gets rejected. And more months pass. And by now, Betty Lou, she's getting really impatient. I mean, she's ready to collect on that life insurance policy and those pension benefits. So she goes and she has husband number 5 officially declared dead, and she's made the administrator of his estate. However, according to the law, she's required to wait 3 years before she can get anything from his estate. So she waits, and 2 years go by. And one day, kind of randomly, police get a call. And the call is from some random guy. And this guy claims that he used to hook up with Betty Lou. And that one night they got really drunk and she told him that she killed husband number 5 and buried him in the front yard. And so police hear this and they're like, oh snap! And they bring in one of Betty Lou's daughters and they question her. Not the daughter from before, a totally different daughter. But this daughter spills everything, saying, I know my mom killed husband number 5. And so police get a warrant and they go search Betty Lou's trailer and they find husband number 5's body in the wishing well out front and husband number 4 underneath the back patio. And so, bam, they arrest Betty Lou. Here's her mugshot. And ultimately, Betty Lou goes to trial and she's found guilty and she gets sentenced to death. And interestingly, neither of her kids who helped her with the bodies got any prison time because they both ended up flipping on her.